Hello, my name's Gavin, and this is Genre Books, and today I'm looking at the local horror prompt of the Horror Mayhem event. I didn't have to travel too far, 25 minutes in the car, so I do count this as local, but what it might lack in geographic nearness, I think, is made up by the double whammy of writers that we can find here. We went to Rye in East Sussex and visited Lamb House. Lamb House is now a National Trust property, but it has, amongst its many tenants over the centuries, had four writers in residence. The first and most famous is Henry James, who annoyingly didn't write The Turn of the Screw whilst he was at Lamb House. He wrote it whilst he was leasing Lamb House, but he was having the builders do some decorating work. Some 15 years after Henry's death, new tenants arrived at Lamb House who had known Henry James. Henry James had been a friend of the family. EF Benson is the name on the lease. Edward Frederick Benson, or Fred as he is known, and he quite often has his brother to stay with him, Arthur Benson. Both of these Bensons write ghost stories. There is a third Benson brother who also wrote some ghost stories, Robert Hugh Benson. In the late 60s, another tenant of Lamb House is Rumour Godden, who wrote, amongst other things, Black Narcissus. But that's not a ghost story, so unfortunately she can no longer figure in this video. What I would like to concentrate on for the next section is just EF Benson, Fred Benson. In the last week I have read a selection of his ghost stories, The Outcast and Other Tales, edited by Mike Ashley, part of the British Library Tales of the Weird, and also The Life of E.F. Benson by Brian Masters, so a biography. And we're going to start to talk about this guy, also an Edward Benson, but this is Edward White Benson, E.F. Benson's father, and where a lot of the Benson family problems stem from, because this isn't just a biography of E.F. Benson. This takes the story of the entire family, which I don't think it can be separated from it. As a family, they are a group of people with remarkable achievements. Edward White Benson, the father, is a strict disciplinarian. He's also a headmaster at a private school. He becomes the head of his own family at a very young age. Brooks no argument, even from his mother or his siblings. Everything must be done his way. He is destined for great things. He's selfish, incredibly selfish. There's not a lot of money. He will not take charity. His uncle offers to look after one of the younger brothers. Says he'll bring them up, fund their education, send them to university, and Benson refuses on his brother's behalf, as the uncle is a Unitarian. The Benson family is also related to and friendly with the Sidgwick family. Edward White Benson is a dozen years older than his wife, Mary or Minnie, who is one of the Sidgwicks. He meets Mary when she is 11 years old, and when she is 12, he extracts a promise from her that she will marry him, and he writes in his own diary about how he will marry her. Now, this is not a perverse relationship, but it's an incredibly selfish one. He is taking advantage of a young girl and extracting a promise from her that she really doesn't know the implications of. But he is also using this not as a way to get a young wife, but as a way to go away for 7 years, do some stuff that he wants to do without the temptation of other women, because he has promised himself to this, what will be young bride. And their relationship is imbalanced. He is unchanging in his attitudes. He treats his wife like he ends up treating his children. It's not that he doesn't love them, it's that he really is very bad at expressing this. And this comes over most as advice, self-improvement advice. But he's a tyrant. Like I said, he becomes a headmaster of a private school, and his young family must be exemplars. They can't always be exemplars, and therefore relationships become strained. His wife is put under immense mental strain and does have to leave at some points. Edward White Benson himself is absolutely not immune to mental health issues. He would these days have been absolutely diagnosed as a manic depressive. Arthur Benson, EF Benson's older brother, is effectively diagnosed as a manic depressive in later life. EF Benson's older sister is institutionalized. EF Benson himself thinks he is struggling, but decides that he keeps himself together to keep the family running. He is for a flighty person, he becomes the one that they all end up depending on. But for Benson the father, this strict disciplinary and strict Anglican approach pays dividends. He becomes known to Queen Victoria and to the Prime Minister. He is shortlisted to become the first Bishop of Truro. After a few years as Bishop of Truro, he is tapped up and becomes Archbishop of Canterbury. He is now the head of the Anglican Church. For someone who is selfish and an egotist, this is potentially not the best thing that could have happened to the family. And the Benson children, having to be examples of good behaviour whilst their father was a headmaster, now that their father is the head of the Anglican Church, this becomes even more of an issue. An added strain now appears when the eldest son, Martin, dies. Martin was the ablest of the scholars of the Benson family. He was absolutely destined for great things. He is eulogised in such fantastic terms that you wonder if all of it could really be true. He really does sound too good to be true. And then dies of meningitis at the age of 17. Obviously throws both parents into grief, his father into another depression, and puts more of the focus on the rest of the family. They can't all take that focus. They all rebel in different ways, and if they can't rebel, then they just suffer. So A C Benson, the eldest remaining child, struggles with depression and self-doubt for the rest of his life. Although he becomes headmaster at Eton, he becomes an accomplished writer himself. His diaries are absolutely voluminous and not all published yet. I think there are like 174 volumes of them. He's also a ghost story writer. He also, on request of the king, puts some king. This is King Edward VII here, who comes after Victoria. Is asked to put some words to Elgar's pomp and circumstance, and therefore A C Benson writes Land of Hope and Glory, which is a tune pretty much anyone in the UK knows. Maggie Benson, EF Benson's remaining elder sister. There is another elder sister who also dies. But Maggie Benson becomes an Egyptologist. She is a philosopher. She also inherits the father's temper and has her own mental health issues. She's institutionalized for years and dies in that institution. This happens after the death of the father, and the family decamp to various places. The youngest of the children, Robert Hugh Benson, is also a writer. He is a spoilt brat, and he rebels against the family in a very specific way, and possibly the worst way that you could do if you are the son of the Archbishop of Canterbury. Thankfully the father was dead by this point, but Robert Hugh Benson becomes a Catholic priest. His most famous books are Catholic apologies, but he's also a ghost story writer. And then we have EF Benson, Fred Benson. He starts as pretty much a dilettante. He is an able student, but he is a lazy student. He is a snob. He is very taken with all the trappings of, a family living at Lambeth Palace because his father is Archbishop of Canterbury. He uses this certainly to his advantage at the school that he goes to, but he also starts to write. Writing is almost like a mania for the Benson family. They are all compulsive writers. I don't know how much of this is people in the Victorian era. This is obviously how they are communicating. People had correspondence an awful lot more, but the Bensons are writing for their own entertainment. They write ghost stories to each other at Christmas. In later years, the three remaining sons will entertain their mother by taking a sheet of paper, going off to a corner of the room and writing a one-page short story in the style of one of the other brothers, apparently with hilarious results. Arthur Benson's 170 odd volumes of his diary just display an absolute compulsion, a mania to write. Mania, possibly not the right word to use when we're talking about a family with delicate mental health issues. Certainly a compulsion, let's say. But E.F. Benson, and here's a nice link, E.F. Benson's first novel, the first person to look at it critically is Henry James, who is a friend of the family. Doesn't have some great things to say about it. It gets put in a drawer and put away for a couple of years. Benson takes it out, and his mother had shown it to Henry James. He decides to show it to a friend of the family, Mrs. Harrison, who writes under the pen name Lucas Mallet. Was a very famous writer, not a highbrow writer in Henry James stakes, but possibly more where Fred was pitching his work. And she gives him some very good advice. He reworks a novel, sends it in, goes off on an archaeological expedition to Greece, and upon his return finds that he's been top of the bestseller lists for a number of weeks. The novel is a sensation, and he does let it go to his head somewhat. He has an annoying facility and ease at writing, and this is not always to his benefit. Certainly as someone who is relying on writing for their income, the idea that you can sit down in a few weeks and churn out a novel is an appealing one. But not all of his novels are remembered fondly, and even his champions, even the biographer here says, some of them are best left forgotten. But when he applies himself, he has successes, and these successes keep him going. And as he's older, and as the pressure to write becomes less financial, because he is at this point supporting various members of his family. He is able to develop his style and the maturity in the writing reaps critical dividends for him. But the family story is not a happy one. EF Benson becomes essentially the last man standing. His remaining elder sister, as I said, dies in an institution. His remaining elder brother, Arthur Benson, A C Benson, who he becomes more close to in their later years, stays with him at Lamb House. He dies. In the middle of this, the younger brother, Hugh Benson, has died. His mother had also died, and he finds himself in a new phase of his life. He's still writing, he's still churning out plenty of books. He's also now the mayor of Rye, and his notable critical successes, as I've said, seem to have come later in his career. He has also, from the 1919 onwards, begun writing ghost stories seriously. It's in this later period of life that he also writes some non-fiction books. He writes a biography of Queen Victoria, which is very well received. He knew Queen Victoria. He writes a biography of Charlotte Bronte, which is also very well received. He didn't know Charlotte Bronte, but members of his family did, because the Sidgwicks were the family Charlotte Bronte was the governess for, although she didn't have a great time of it. It's also in these last years that he writes probably his most famous works, which are the Map and Lucia novels. He's taking more time over his writing by this point, but he has less distractions in the rest of his life, so arthritis is keeping him from being the man about town that he once was, or the mountain climber. I believe he climbed both the Jungfrau and the Matterhorn. He was also a gold medal skater. He really did a lot, but by this point, I'm not going to say infirm, but compromised as to what he can do on a daily basis, but sit and write. Well, that's a scattergun snapshot of the family. The biography is very well done, and I'm glad it covers the whole family, and I'm glad it puts stuff into context about their behaviour, and they are great subjects for a biography as well, because absolutely everything is written down. There are some bits which have been destroyed. There are some things which can only be inferred. The homosexuality of all three of the brothers that survive into adulthood is fairly obvious, but dealt with in a number of different ways by them. Arthur, it is another cause for mental anguish. He is certainly, he is not someone who gives in to the, any urgings that he may feel as regards his love life. Hugh retreats to the Catholic Church. EF Benson, Fred, we don't really know. Is the one thing he doesn't write about, and he writes about absolutely every subject except himself, and everyone else is too circumspect to say anything. But he is someone who has an endless stream in his life of male relationships, but they are never spoken of in terms of romantic love. EF Benson has been claimed or reclaimed as, a gay writer, and I think that would probably have mortified him. But we're here to talk about the ghost stories, and they're fantastic. A lot is written about the Victorian ghost story, and rightly so, but I think I prefer the Edwardian ghost story. As well as E.F. Benson, you have M.R. James, who was, incidentally, E.F. Benson's teacher. You have W.W. Jacobs, Walter Delamere, Algernon Blackwood. You have William Hodgson with his Carnacki ghost stories. You have fantastically named Oliver Onions. Late Victorians and Edwardians loved their ghost stories. Here we have links to Benson's own family again. Benson's father was a member of the Ghost Society at Cambridge. One of Benson's uncles on the Sidgwick side began the Society for Psychical Institute at Cambridge. Lots of different writers believed in ghosts, spirituality. This isn't something that is purely within the realms of fiction. They truly believed that some of this might be possible. But I like the Edwardian ghost stories for, they have a very genteel feel. They are usually upper middle or high class tales. So these are people who spend a lot of time in old, historic, empty houses. And that history is very important. Lots of these ghosts are ancient. Lots of the stories as they are presented to us are at a remove, either by time, where you have someone narrating something that happened to them decades ago. Alternatively, the remove might not be temporal, but just between people. So, we are hearing about a story that happened to somebody else. So there is something there, whether it's time or multiple interpretations, it can put an element of doubt into the belief that there is something supernatural going on. But they can be quite grisly. And in Benson's stories, they often come with a sense of justice. Someone is getting their comeuppance. This is something that, the moralising does come out in quite a lot of Benson's books. I think we can probably forgive the son of the Archbishop of Canterbury for sermonising on occasion. But for local horror, there are two stories in this anthology. Well, one a recounting and one a story, and that is The Secret Garden and The Flint Knife, both of which relate to the garden that I showed in the opening montage. And The Secret Garden relates Benson's own experience of seeing a ghost on more than one occasion in that garden. And this is followed by a story called The Flint Knife, where he has turned that experience into a story. This is not something that is pure fantasy, and I think that probably counts for a number of the authors of ghost stories from Victorian and Edwardian times, more so than it does to anyone who is currently writing horror. There are several EF Bensons to get to grips with here. I knew about the ghost stories. I knew about but have not read the Map and Lucia novels, but I didn't know that he was such a prolific writer. I did not know the story of the family. And in terms of uncovering ghosts, I think reading the biography of Fred Benson, and by extension his whole family and the issues that they went through, has been, digging up some old ghosts in another way, and has been quite sort of illuminating from that perspective. And one last thing about Lamb House, which tickled me, but on reflection could possibly be the germ of a ghost story in and of itself. There is a very small changing room on the top floor of Lamb House, which has in it Henry James's morning suit. It's a very smart suit that he wore basically on high days and holidays, and he would wear this every Christmas. On his death, the suit somehow ends up with John Betjeman, who becomes Poet Laureate, and who also wears the same suit every Christmas. On Betjeman's death, this goes to the satirist comedian John Wells, who also wears it every Christmas. And after Wells's death, I think it got passed to someone else, who also did the same, and then gave it back to the National Trust, where it waits for someone else to begin to wear it every Christmas. I'm sure someone at the National Trust sneaks in on a Christmas morning and wears it just to maybe keep that tradition alive.